Just hours before it was set to take effect, the Trump administration's ban on downloading video sharing app TikTok was halted by federal ruling. Why does the ban violate the U.S. Constitution? And what are TikTok's prospects in the seesaw battle between politics and business? And what do the twists and turns in the case reveal? To talk about these, I'm pleased to be joined by Shen Yi, Director of the Research Center for Cyberspace Governance at Fudan University, Professor Jeffrey Towson, host of Jeff's Asia Tech class, and Bruce Fine, former Associate Deputy Attorney General and General Counsel for the Federal Communications Commission under President Reagan. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. Well, the suspension of the download ban by a federal court marks another dramatic turn in the back-and-forth struggle between TikTok and the U.S. government. So, Bruce, what are the legal grounds of the suspension?
Well, one is what you indicated. The United States Constitution protects freedom of speech, and downloading and communicating through TikTok is clearly within the parameters of free speech. It doesn't mean it's absolute, but the national security justification that's asserted by President President Trump seems very, very weak, arbitrary and capricious as well. And therefore, the judge preliminarily concluded that there could not go forward this ban on the download until there was a full briefing on the merits of the case. I think that we need to look at the TikTok executive order in conjunction with President Trump's political ambitions and campaign. It's clear it's part of the overall mosaic of efforts by Mr. Trump to demonize China, whether it's over Hong Kong or Taiwan or the Uyghurs or the South China Sea, trade restrictions or otherwise, and TikTok is simply another quiver in that arsenal. China is not popular in the United States Congress, and I think here we have Mr. Trump appealing to xenophobia sentiments in the United States.
Besides it's Chinese, it is also our business. So there's another line of argument, Bruce, saying that the apps are actually private property, and the ban was due to be enforced without proper discussion or due process. What do you think of that?
Well, that argument is a strong one, but in the area of national security, and because we're dealing at least with the owner being a Chinese entity, I think that's less persuasive. The fact is, under our laws, the president's unilaterally, under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, freezes contracts, prevents investments, requires a disinvestment, if you will, without due process, even being listed, as some kind of a terrorist group or a banned person is done when the foreigner is the target, without any process at all. So that's, I think, a less strong argument than the freedom of speech and international communications that is enjoyed by Americans.
So this is not the end of the legal process. Where it is headed next?
Well, it depends a little upon what the Trump administration, whether they wish to appeal to the Circuit Court or even up to the United States Supreme Court. So that's where that stands. I fully expect, if we look at the pattern of Mr. Trump's litigating tactics, is that he will move to a higher court. Whether he succeeds or not is exceptionally doubtful. In a very high percentage of these kinds of regulatory cases, the Trump administration has lost rather than won because they've been very sloppy, if you will, in developing record that supports the alleged national security claim to justify the suppression of speech in this case.
And Jeffrey, this kind of push and pull is, of course, a complicating factor for TikTok. It has around 100 million active users in the U.S. So how will it affect the TikTok's business, considering there is so much uncertainties?
Yeah, obviously the clock is kind of, I guess, ticking away here for TikTok in that, they're very dependent on users, people watching, people creating videos, and they know what's going on. So, there's a migration of content creators to other platforms. The competitors are ramping up similar products. So, I mean, there is a bit of pressure coming from the marketplace because they see an opening here. And then also there's multiple levels of this ban. There's the one that's been sort of temporarily halted, which I think most people agreed was always prone to a legal challenge. And then there's the CFIUS ruling, which is coming down next month, and who knows what else may end up being put on the table. So I think in terms of the timing here, I think the competitor aspect is important, and I think their deal with Oracle will probably be the deciding factors long before the legal options are, run down completely.
Let's talk about the prospect. TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, and the prospective partners, like you said, Oracle, and also Walmart, are still talking over which side should be own the controlling stake, and what about the whereabouts of the algorithms. So what is the sticking points during their negotiations? Can you speculate for us, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I think they're actually doing quite well. I think ByteDance, which really didn't go international in a very good way. Everyone could see this coming a year ago. But in the last month, they've really done quite well in terms of reframing the discussion away from, we need to sell the company. Ownership was never really the issue. The issue was a certain key control decisions, like who controls the data of Americans and who controls editorial decision making, who's deleting videos in Texas. And you can solve both of those control problems, decision making points, without selling things. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't own 51% of Facebook, but he does control editorial decision making. So Oracle was one way of solving part of that problem, which is now we know who's going to control the data and the privacy and the security, and now we kind of got to figure out who's going to control the editorial decision making. And then you've probably got a solution. I think that solves most of what the US government was concerned about to begin with. And ownership was always a bit of a rabbit hole. There was no real reason to go down that path.
Mr. Shen, what do you think the TikTok's consideration are focusing on? Is it still selling the stocks to American partners or keeping its algorithm intact?
To TikTok, they are trying to find a solution to solve their problems. Actually, the draft version of the deal with the TikTok between the TikTok, Walmart, and Oracle's, this kind of version, which has already been denied for once by CFIUS in early maybe June or July this time, but suddenly they got the deal again. So technically speaking, this can solve the problems because when they save all the US user data inside the servers in United States, which can be monitored or reviewed by Oracles, it can be highly effectively resolve this national security concern. But suddenly, because of this US domestic political atmospheres, it's quite clear that Trump wants to win twice from these deals. From one side, he wants to become very tough on China by representing his tough attitude to dealing with these TikTok issues. By the other hand, he also wants to make these deals so they can make the profit. So that's the reason why you first got the draft deal, and suddenly all this has been turned down, and then TikTok go to the court, and the judges partially suspended the paragraph 1 of these executive orders, which just still allowing them to providing the security update for the users of this software, which is very important to protect and ensure the security of their personal data.
And Jeffrey, do you think probably President Trump can paraphrase this as any kind of triumphant move for him? Is it the owning of American company owning TikTok a bigger win, or is it getting the algorithm from TikTok a more likely outcome for him?
I don't really get the sense that the interests of the U.S. government here, as enunciated by Trump, but there's been other people involved, senators and things like that, who've made comments. I don't think it was ever really about we need to own this company or an American needs to own this company or the algorithm has to be owned. The irony here is that I think the U.S. government and ByteDance basically agree that the position of the U.S., from my interpretation, is we want Americans to control the data and we want Americans to control the editorial decisions. And that's actually what ByteDance wants too. They don't want to control those things. They don't want to be making editorial decisions about what is seen in California. So they kind of would like that too to be off their plate.
But this is already the business practice
the right
of
mechanism.
TikTok before everything happened. The Americans made the editorial decisions.
I think there was some arguments coming out of ByteDance that, oh, we have an American CEO, and oh, the data is hosted in the US, and oh, we're a Cayman Island company. Nobody really believed that. I mean, that was some legal jargon, but the truth is everyone knew who the key decision makers were. If there were dual class shares in something like TikTok Global, or if Larry Ellison or Oracle was in charge, then I think you start to convince people of that. But most of what their media relations team was putting out for the last year, most people didn't buy that, for better or for worse.
And Bruce, obviously the ruling is just a temporary measure, as TikTok is still set to be banned on the U.S. market on November the 12th. So there are two ways for TikTok to survive. One is to sue, to continue to sue the Trump administration on the grounds that this is unconstitutional. The second is finalize that deal with Oracle and Walmart, which seems to be good enough to win approval from Trump. But which way do you likely is going to happen, and what about the time frames for both approaches?
Well, I think, first of all, November date isn't necessarily a hard date. It can be deferred. Secondly, Mr. Trump is a transactional president. One of the items that has been excluded from the debate is his desire to, I believe, extort billions of dollars from the participants in this deal, whether that goes into the tax coffers, and he says, I've saved American taxpayers $5 billion. At other times, he suggested he wants $5 billion set aside to help educate low-income children and students. And I think that's what he's trying to leverage here, and is encountering some kind of resistance from the companies who believe they're being forced to basically respond to government leverage and extortion. I also think that the issue of control is vital, certainly for the hawks. Those who are China hawks, if you will, don't believe there are any circumstances, procedural arrangements that could prevent de facto China, the government, from exercising editorial control. Even if the formal ownership or power lies perhaps in the hands of American companies like Oracle or Walmart, they may have business interests themselves in China and feel that if they want to promote their own products there, they have to bow to so-called self-censorship, whether it's over Hong Kong or Taiwan or the Uyghurs or a whole host of other controversial issues. And that's a real problem because in countries that don't have the same standards of free speech and press that we do, there are many what I would call informal ways in which censorship can be imposed without having it being imposed directly.
Mr. Shen, do you think ceding editorial controls and also the algorithm to the American partners will be good enough for ByteDance?
Oh, come on, guys. After Snowden's, all we know what the U.S. government did in the cyberspace, including this, as to the censorship of manipulation of this information. You have this Cambridge Analytica already procedures of the companies run by yourself, American peoples, to manipulate the information, to intervention in your own electoral procedures, I think a little bit sorry, how to say that, a little bit ironic on these things. Because if we say that you can use these reasons to deal with this TikTok, so what will happen to Facebook when they go to another countries to doing business? Can we ask this Facebook to sell out all these local data and to these local companies because we don't trust Washington? That's kind of deep challenges for a very basic commercial guidelines that ensure this world market runs. We need to take a very practical attitude on these things. First, you need to have a basic trust of these companies. They have their run. Actually, frankly speaking, according to my knowledge, the TikTok and the downside, they spend at least 2 years to fulfill all these requirements providing from the US government. And the last, when they fulfill all these things in a technical aspect, they just got answer. Because you are Chinese companies, we don't trust you. A little bit ridiculous. You need to take a more serious and practical attitude to make a practical, constructive solution to these things. Actually, they did it. The oracles can monitor the servers if you really worry on these things. We can ensure that all these internet user data has been stored in these servers. You can monitor the data files, whether it's being transferred to other countries or not. It can be verified by a very practical technical means. And then it's providing a very concrete basement for future corporations. We need to improve the atmosphere, and people need to reproducing their perception to dealing with these things so that we can do business in a normal ways. Otherwise, we are doing very stupid things to waste our times in this mission impossible. Actually, the TikTok had operating 3. He can just continue the runnings until the US government say, okay, it's the time, you need to quit, and then it's quit. Go to other countries to doing business as users. The only losers is these US internet users, which should enjoy their convenient and habits.
Okay, Jeffrey, I want you to respond to Mr. Shen's double standard thinking. Actually, this is probably a prevalent thinking among many Chinese. They're treating TikTok differently, not because it's a data company, but because it is a Chinese company.
Yeah, I think this is, 49% of this is what we've been talking about, which is, what's a reasonable solution to get this, everyone's concerns is taken care of. That's a deal structure, Oracle, ByteDance. 51% of this is the US-China situation that ByteDance has kind of just gotten swept up in. There's a lot more going on here. The fact that the relationship between the United States and China is being reset, rethought in terms of trade, in terms of technology, and then I think in terms of media and information, which is really what's going on here. So yeah, there's much larger forces at play here. But, I think that's working itself out slowly. I think there's probably a reasonable solution for TikTok and ByteDance in the US that's doable. And I wouldn't be as optimistic about, say, a Huawei situation where the concerns are far greater, I think, than a short video app.
So, Mr. Shen, TikTok is just a casualty in the bigger trade and tech war between China and the US. There's no way that TikTok can avoid this.
I cannot completely agree with these things. Yes, part of the reasons, but another part of the reason is that competitors represented by the Facebook take advantage of these atmospheres and input very negative information to lobby the government, try to use this atmosphere, highly criticalized national security reasons to defeat its commercial counterparts in an illegal way or in more moral ways. I think it's business. It's always business, and we need to take a very practical attitude to doing business.
And is this argument also winning some traction in the US, Jeffrey? Because obviously Facebook and Instagram has also been under scrutiny because of their data use. They've been selling their data to companies to manipulate probably users' perceptions. Why isn't it applied to an American company?
Yeah, that's kind of the funniest part about this. So much of this is about trust. because there's a lot of data, there's a lot of insight, and that is feeding into this U.S.-China dynamic, which is, I agree, 51% of what's going on here. But let's not kid ourselves. Americans don't trust Mark Zuckerberg either. So there's not a lot of trust in any of this sector at the moment. But definitely the U.S.-China situation, at least this point in time, maybe it's an election year thing, maybe it's just the last couple years, maybe this will fade, but clearly the U.S.-China relationship is being rethought and reset, and a couple companies on both sides of this have been caught up in that.
Yeah.
And definitely ByteDance has been.
And
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a short video app.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is. So maybe it is a melodramatically overplayed by the politicians in a way. But Mr. Shen, despite the distrust between the Chinese and U.S., especially the politicians, do you think it is a workable solution for TikTok?
Yes, actually, they already got it. They got a deal with the Oracle and Walmart. Actually, every part is quite satisfied with these deals. And they deliver these draft deals to Nunes, the Secretary of Treasury, who is also the leader of the safest regimes, to overview these deals. And actually, at least they are partially agree with these things, and then they deliver it to the White House. It's quite clear the final obstacles located inside the White House in this 2020 election year. In my point, I guess maybe Trump got everything he wants. First, he want to become very tough to prove that he's a quite good man to doing business, big deals. So he tried to raise the requirement for this deal. And the second, maybe after these election days, when he feel a little bit feel safer to ensure that he can be re-elected, maybe we will find out that finally this deal has been approved. But finally, this deal should not only be approved by the U.S. government, it should also be approved by the Chinese government. Then, if we wish finally both sides take more practical and realistic attitude to deal with these things, maybe finally they can get a solution.
But it's going to be an uphill battle for data companies from China. We've been told that TikTok has also approached the Australian government that it will allow them to review their algorithm and source code. It seems Chinese tech companies have spent more to win the trust from Western governments. What does it mean for them, Mr. Shen?
I think that the source code checkup, as the source code security checkup, is quite standard procedures in such kind of companies. The Microsoft, the Huawei, and all other companies doing the same things in lots of countries. And on the second point, you will find all these Chinese companies are very interesting. The only interesting thing is they try to focus on business, and they tried their best to solve all the reasonable national security concerns. So they try their best to cooperate with government and to doing their best under these regulation systems. So I think all the things they do should get some positive feedback. But till now, a little pathetic thing is very negative. What they only get is kind of negative feedback. It's quite unfair to these companies.
And Bruce, there is another suit. The Wechat ban has also been suspended by U.S. courts, one in California this time. Is there any similar pattern there, or is another line of argument?
Well, I think the Wechat ban also is one that implicates the First Amendment rights of free speech of Americans. And it isn't as complicated as TikTok because it doesn't have the foreign ownership as direct as ByteDance. I will say this with regard to the overall challenge that any of these Chinese connected companies have.
Yeah.
The United States will not simply limit itself to trying to curtail operations here. The United States routinely will approach foreign partners, the European Union, Five Eyes, Australia, and seek to have them impose the same kind of bans or curtailments that we're utilizing in the United States. We see that, for example, with Wechat and the use of technologies that could be dual use for the Chinese military. So I don't think we can look at TikTok as just a U.S. effort to limit its operations here. It is anti-China. I think that it's not simply a reset button. I think, unfortunately, the United States and China are headed for a collision course over dominance in the Pacific and the South China Sea, and I do not see this relenting in any near future time period.
But Jeffrey, this is purely anti-China or anti-any strong competitors, because Americans should be a bunch of people believe in open markets, and those bans on businesses or companies simply for doing well doesn't sound very good to businesses who are interested in American markets. And is that something we should worry about?
I think it's probably mostly about the sector and then probably country specific. Like if we were talking about e-commerce and selling shoes and toys, none of this is a problem. And there's a lot of that going on every day. I think technology and media and information tend to be much more sensitive areas between the United States and China right now. And we also see that between, say, India, Australia, and a couple other places. But once you move out of this space to e-commerce and ride sharing, nobody even brings this stuff up. So it's a little country specific, definitely, but it's also probably sort of sector specific.
Yeah, and Mr. Shen, do you think data companies will be nationalistic from down under, because it seems nobody is trusting each other that much?
So I think that's the real challenge. On one side, the general characteristic of this ICT is they need a global market.
Yeah, a bigger market.
Yes, but on the other side, you find that it's lots of challenges. It's the main obstacle from the Western countries, and maybe in future we have to got some balance between these two requirements so that we can ensure the future development of these technologies, the market, and our world.
But because the reason I asked this, India also banned some Chinese apps, citing national security concerns. So it means that will be a fractured tech cosmos in the world. Nobody is using the other's data company or data services any longer. Mr. Shen?
That would be very ridiculous, because India and the United States, they have different reasons to do the same things. From India's side, it's more emotional nationalism. They want to express their defeating feelings based on these border conflict issues and so on. From the United States, I highly agree with you. Just you mentioned that the reason is not China or any other countries, but the United States want to be the winner. When they cannot defeat the competitors in the technology or the market aspect, they use their political national security tools or means in these business competitors because they want to win. According in their languages, that's part of the fair trade. The fair trade means the United States finally will win. But to other countries, that means a highly unfair games.
We have to wrap up there. Thank you, Mr. Shen. Thank you, Jeffrey. And thank you, Bruce, for that. And that's our dialogue on CGTN. We've been talking about TikTok's ban and the suspension. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.